Reactor online. Sensors online. Weapons online. All systems nominal.
Hey, good evening, everybody. I'm just gonna do some quick olive drab dry brush. I know I've done drab before, but it was the detailed highlighting and all that good stuff. And what I want to show you is what my starting exposure to olive drab was, which is this color, which I've been painting. You could probably call it my primary force. I have, I think, 2 companies worth of First Crucis Lancers. So they're a dark green, kind of a drab color. So I don't paint these the way I paint now, because I started painting these 15 years ago, and if I were to paint them now, not only would it take me longer, but they wouldn't look the same, and that kind of would bother me. The nice thing is that it doesn't take very long. So the process is what I'm going to go over, and I've got a few kind of as you go type of steps here that I'll start painting from to demonstrate how you get to start to finish. And it really doesn't take very long. Honestly, again, with most things, it's just waiting for things to dry, especially like washes and things like that. So we're going to go with black. You're going to start with a darker green, and then you're going to move up to a dry brush, and then a shading or a toning wash, if you will. And then you're going to move into another dry brush again, and it'll all make sense as I go through and get these done. But that's the ultimate goal, is to get that guy on the right there. I've got chat windows up, so if you post a question there, I should be able to read it and see it and respond. So for tonight, colors we'll be using, and you can obviously use variants of these, but I've got dark angel green. I have an old bottle of Reaper Pro Olive. I actually bought 2 bottles of this once I knew that they were going to start changing them and doing different stuff, so that I know I could keep making this paint scheme. So that's my olive color. This is the base, the dark green. Dark angel green, obviously you can get that. Anything else that you would want to match to that, or there's a color comparison chart, that'll work. Black, if you obviously paint over your primed miniatures. I prime in black for a lot of things. Dark tone is a good option if you don't make your own black washes. I have a custom magic wash that I've made here. Doesn't mean you have to. Dark tone is a black base. You can also use Nuln Oil. Either of these will give you the desired effect of darkening the green, because we're going to take it up to a lighter color and then wash it back down and then re-highlight over with the same. Brushes tonight, just a smattering of some lesser and more used dry brushes, and I've just got a basic, this is a number 4 generic brush. You've seen me use this before, but this is just a base coating type brush, and this is actually also what I use for a lot of washes. Let's see here. How's the view looking? Tighten this up a little bit. There we go. All right, so I primed this in black, spray black. I've switched to using an airbrush now, but if you prime with an aerosol can, it's prone to your missing areas and stuff, so it never hurts to go back and touch up with black to get in some of those areas where you might have missed or it might have gotten a little thin. So that's what I've done. There's some variants of the color, but black is black for the sake of our paint scheme here. Got a paper towel, and probably won't be able to see this too well, so let me show you on a palette here. I have thinned this green quite a bit for 2 reasons. One, I didn't want it to dry out. I think it was starting to dry out. And 2, the method of application that we're going to use to get this over there is it's different than if it was, if this was still thick, I would need to thin it out in a dish. So you can see it's fairly thin, but this is actually more of a normal consistency to what I would paint with. But if you try to use it straight out of the bottle the way that I'm about to, that won't work. You will need to thin it some. So that's a little caveat there. So I call this kind of a wet brush, which is basically you're using a dry brush, but you're not taking all the paint off. Getting a little whitewash. I'm going to move this over. Oh, sweet. Good. Yeah, this is the first penetrator I've ever painted. So all I'm doing is I'm looking to get the paint obviously on the miniature, but I am not trying to get some sort of super smooth total coverage. I mean, I'm gonna cover the entire miniature surfaces, but as I'm getting this area right here is recessed. If as I'm doing this, I don't get some maybe up in here or maybe right up at this gap, I'm completely okay with that. That is the intent. I want those basically easy shadows. Those are the areas that are going to provide contrast later on, especially because they're going to be black, and then this green is going to get a wash after we do the lighter green, which will also have some highlights, and then you'll get basically a transition, and there is no, that's too thick. I messed that up. All right, so don't do that. It's okay if you do get it on there too quick, but because it is thin, and the black wash will go into the recesses and help fix some of that. So if initially you put it on, don't worry about that. If you have to thin the paint though. If you put it on right out of the bottle and it's thick, it won't be forgiving. The nice thing is that because it's over a black base, the paint is going to settle, or should I say, it's going to mellow out a little bit, and the black will darken. As you can see, it's already turning darker. Let's get my dish out of the way, get back to my paper towel here. Now I am purposely trying to kind of go perpendicular to a lot of the openings though, because I'm not trying to force paint into the recesses. So just keep that in mind. But it is not a strict dry brush of, oh, you got to go perpendicular to all these openings. You don't want to get paint in these recesses, because usually the intent of a dry brush is to highlight, so you don't necessarily do it over the whole thing on most cases, at least in these types of miniatures, simply because they don't take to it very well for some reason. I guess maybe because it's the lack of rounded edges and finer details like hair and faces and muscles and things like that, that, you know, dry brush just doesn't work the same on flat armor panels. It just doesn't. So, but this is how I've gotten around some of that, and you can paint a lot of things like this. In fact, a couple of my other tutorials are very similar to this procedure, and really it's just about, once you get the technique down, you can do quite a bit and have it look pretty good. Or you can get this, 75% solution, and then you can go back in and do some more, I guess, finer work, maybe on panels or things like that, which is what I'm going to demonstrate with white when I make that video for the Word of Blake Militia and Comstar and all that good stuff, because you don't want to spend all your time doing all these white base coats and all this kind of stuff, and then spend all your time blacklining or building up from a darker color, when you can do most of that and then go back and basically put paint in the middle of a panel and have the edges look a little bit darker. It actually adds to the contrast of the entire miniature, and it looks pretty good. It's not a pure, super clean white, but I have had no problem looking at it and going, yeah, that looks good. It's like a combat worn white. If you want parade white, well, use an airbrush. So I'm just working this all over. It goes on bright and then it settles down, or as it dries out, it goes a little more transparent, and you get the truer color of a thinned paint over a dark base coat. If we were doing this over white, it would not be the same effect. You put two miniatures, one white, one black, primed, and paint them with the same color, and let them dry, and you will see a different tone, overall temperature of the color you put over it. In fact, it might even look like a different color out of the bottle than over the white than over the black. So kind of got to experiment. I use bases. You see me, I'll use the hex base that it's on to test things out from time to time. It's handy. It's right there. Typically it's got paint on it that I'm using, either a primer or the base coat maybe. And sometimes I'll intentionally put the same color on the base, knowing I'm going to put sand or grit or whatever over it later, just to leave that as an option, because then I can mess around with, maybe I want to practice something on the side of the hex base, like a detail or pattern or even just like I said, a color and a highlight, just to kind of see how it'll look. It's free, doesn't cost anything. You've already done all the paint work on it, so you might as well use what's available to you, and then after that, just cover it up. I appreciate y'all joining me this evening. I was going to make this video, and then I was like, I could just do a stream, get some activity on the Twitch account there, just to make sure people don't think that I've been gone. I've been on vacation, and then I was in a different state for about a week, and then I got sick right as I got back, right after I posted that I'd be making a video soon, and I sounded really bad. I didn't think you guys would want to listen to my congested and sniffling voice and other sick noises, so I delayed doing a video until I feel a lot better today, so that's good. I know I'm leaving the pot open. I don't normally do that, but I know this won't take me very long. I mean, I've been working on this for 6-7 minutes, maybe 10 with the describing the paint. But if you're gonna, I do gunmetal highlights, but if you haven't decided what you're gonna do yet, just do the whole thing green, gunmetal or black. You can go over it again, and I'd rather have the highlights and stuff on there and take them away than wish I had highlighted it before. But if you have a plan, go for it. I haven't thought about this miniature yet. I just picked it up and put it black on it, and I was like, all right, let's paint this bad boy. You do kind of have to jam the paint into some of these areas. Just remember that if you jam paint in there, it's probably going to be a little brighter than you would want it if you do more than one layer, or if you go back and hit it again, so that when it comes time to wash, you're going to want to maybe hit that area either first and then let it dry, or in all likelihood you'll want to do an entire coverage wash and then look and inspect that area and see if it got dark enough for you, and then just do a little touch-up wash right in that particular area. Alright, so if you guys get the idea of what I'm doing with this, I'm just going to finish it up, and then I'm going to let it dry. So normally, you dry brush, you think, oh yeah, I'll just put paint right over the top of it. I have had multiple instances, usually when I'm painting this scheme, where I will finish one color, and because this is thin, because we've thinned it down, I will go and start dry brushing and have the paint, because I'm maybe dry brushing a little too aggressively and it hasn't quite set yet, I'm knocking the paint off the edges, which doesn't do any good to have a silver paintless edge or scrapes. Another thing to be careful too is the ferrule on, especially on the smaller dry brushes, if you have to get into these little nooks and crannies, which I'm going to switch brushes here in just a moment to get some, because if you start hitting that metal on those areas and corners, you will potentially knock the color off, and then you've got a silver spot you have to touch up, and just adds more work to something that we're trying to make less work with. And I'm not jamming the brush onto this thing. I'm not trying to be super heavy with the application. I'm actually being fairly gentle with the brush. If for what you would call a traditional, if you were calling it a traditional dry brush, you'd probably be more aggressive, trying to get that paint to spread out. But I'm using a fairly light touch in most areas. It's not 100% consistent, but I'm not here to just force paint onto the model. I want to kind of finesse it on. And I'm looking for those bigger, flatter, large surface areas where it would look obviously funny if the paint didn't get mostly evened out. Underside is no big deal. There's going to be natural shadows. That's, get what you can, or get what you feel is appropriate, but don't don't get hung up on trying to do every little part on an area that is either going to have natural shadows or is supposed to be a darker shade. Hey Roy, I'm doing just the Crucis Lancer's green. It doesn't take very long. So there's the base coat. All right, so like I said, I'm going to set him off and let him dry. You can see the gun barrels didn't get any primer in there, but that's no big deal. I can take care of that way later. Set him off to the side. All right, so we're done with the Dark Angel green. I'm going to show you a real quick trick for when you're dry brushing if you only have one dry brush. And like I did say, I was going to use a smaller dry brush to go and touch up that, but I already have one. I already have a miniature I've got this Axeman that's got the green on it and it's cured, so we're just going to move along to that. Take isopropyl alcohol, which I set somewhere. And if you're using the same dry brush and you're switching colors, if you dip the brush into the water, then you're going to have a wet dry brush and then you no longer have a dry brush. However, if you use isopropyl alcohol, it does two things. Keep your miniatures clear of that too, because you might get splatter. You're cleaning, because most acrylic paint and cleansers are alcohol based. So I'm taking a lot of this alcohol out. And then you get the added benefit of isopropyl alcohol dries really quick. So what I'm going to do is clean the majority of this out, and you can even dip it in water and then do the alcohol afterwards, and it will dry out fairly quickly. So, but I'm working with green, so I don't mind that there's going to be some Dark Angel green kind of left over. But if you were doing, say, a red and a blue or a red and a white or something like that, you'd either switch brushes or completely clean your brush and let it dry. But if you use alcohol, you're gonna have it dry much faster. So it's a little trick that I didn't know until not too long ago did I find that out. So once you got it cleaned, I just kind of fan it on my hand to kind of just agitate the bristles and let the air get to them real quick, and then I set it down. And then in the meantime, I'm cleaning the colors, and by the time I get to the next miniature and get my paint out and so on and so forth, it's either dry or almost completely dry. All right, that washes out the camera. I don't like having that on there. Okay, next up, we're gonna do the olive dry brush, and it's gonna be a little bit different. We're not trying to do just edges with this. We're trying to get, no kidding, almost a coverage again, but this time we're doing like I said, more traditional dry brush. So now this is going to be dip it in the paint pot. This is not as thin as the Dark Angel green, and this is the rub it around and start to get less and less paint as you go and move on the paper towel. I like to set a little bit of a damp area here that I can kind of go back to, so I don't always have to keep dipping into the bottle, but whatever your preference is. And then I kind of test it out on something that's not the model. So I'm just going to use this rock and kind of see how it's laying down. Cool. So now I'm lightly dry brushing just to get the raised edges at first, just to kind of get a feel for, make sure the brush is dry, and that I have a decent amount of paint loaded on the brush. I'm not trying to cover it all at once. I'm just trying to first get the areas defined. See, because what's going to happen, let me use something to point with here, is you're going to get these outer edges highlighted in the center, especially in these flatter panels, and this is where it comes into play with these square flat miniatures. They don't take dry brushing as well, is that this area is going to be a lot darker. Well, that's great. We do eventually want that, but we don't want that for this layer, because we're trying to take this darker green up to a lighter green, and then we're going to mellow it back down with some black wash. And if we don't get it bright enough to begin with, it's going to end up being a dark green and not really a drab or an olive drab type of color when we're finished. So, and the other thing too, that why we're doing 3 layers when you can just do olive drab right now and call it done. Well, you could easily, just dry brush it and call it good. That's fine. But what we're doing by adding these layers, which is, you know, 2 additional layers, is we're setting more and more shadows and more contrast, and we got a gradient from a darker color to a much lighter color. And because we've put an additional couple layers of paint on the miniature, the overall smoothness, and a dry brush won't be perfectly smooth, but the overall smoothness of the miniature will appear much more natural, and it won't look kind of like a gloppy or a kind of a quick, you know, maybe somewhat haphazard dry brush technique or dry brush paint job. Which, you know, again, if you can do 1 or 2 extra steps and you're painting 4 or 8 or 12 of these, you know, you're saving yourself a lot of time, and you're getting a much more desirable effect. You know, you want it to look as best as possible. If you took the time to paint it, put it together, have them look good on the table. And these do look good from about the 2 to 3 foot range. These are by far not my best paint jobs. But in the interest of having a painted company of miniatures on the table versus 1 painted miniature and 11 others in primer, this is a good option. Or if you're just, you know, you're not that into painting, this is a great way to kind of make ends meet. Get the miniatures on the table, they're painted, and you didn't have to pay anybody to do it. I mean, you needed literally 3 colors and a bottle of wash, and you can do this. And I've talked about this before with other colors, the yellow, and you haven't done the red video yet. White's a little different, but that's because it's a pain. But the yellow was another kind of a sticky color to use, but this methodology is really, can be applied in any color, really. It's not exclusive to just one type or one shade of color. I know I've done some olive drab before, and you're like, oh yeah, he's doing green again. It's like, well, you know, I'm going to paint what I need to paint with my backlog, but I'm also going to show you guys as I go things that I've learned and things that make your life easier and let it go faster and help you get those models on the table in something other than bare metal or primer. So you can see now, as I've kind of worked over about, you know, half the miniature or so, I've kind of gone back to the leg, and now I'm starting to kind of be a little more deliberate in trying to either somewhat stipple or change the direction of as I'm dry brushing to get more of the green, the lighter green, the olive onto the flat surfaces. And then you'll look and see like the top of this ankle here, or this little the cooling fin down here, like that doesn't have any color on it. Well, it's a top surface. It's gonna have color. It's gonna have a lighter color on it. So now I got to go there and basically attack it with the brush. And I'm not necessarily trying to drag. I'm actually deliberately pushing the paint onto these surfaces. And this is where I'm talking about the traditional dry brush, where you're not really trying to just highlight it and go. You actually have to come back and look at it and treat it a little bit more like a normal panel painting paint job, where you're looking for those details, you're looking for those things that would catch light. And again, it's okay if it gets kind of bright. I'm not even worried about it right now. I know that's a little thick, but when I put washes on it, and for my recipe for this, I use 2 coats. It takes 2 coats of my wash to get it, of my mixed wash, to get it the darker shaded tone that I use for my unit, to make them all kind of look fairly similar. That doesn't mean that if you go and use Nuln Oil and you only do 1 wash, or you only use 1 shade or 1 application of dark tone, that you're wrong. It just do what you find that you like. If you want to do 2 layers and get it darker and then bring it back a little more, great. If you want it a little brighter, absolutely don't do the 2 washes, or do thinned custom washes. I use the Future Floor Polish on my washes to aid in the capillary action there, for it to not settle. But you actually kind of want the wash to set on some of the flat panels a little bit. You don't want it to pool, but you do want it to kind of be a little bit less resistant to staying there, because you want those panels to get a little darker too. You don't want them to be the darkest, but if that makes sense while I'm talking and painting at the same time. There's also a technique where you can gloss a miniature to help make those washes go into the recesses. For this technique, you don't want that. Like I said, you're trying to darken all of the miniature, not just the recess areas, and that's because this second base coat is really, if you think of it as a base coat, we did the black as just the primer, and then we based in the dark green, and this is the second base coat. This is like almost like a detail highlight base coat, because we're not done. The base coat is setting the overall tone for the color, but the wash is really what's going to set the actual final color for us, because when we come back after the wash is completely dry, we're going to highlight again with this olive, but we're not using it to change the color. All we're doing is at that point is bringing out the raised edges, like a, you would consider a normal or purposeful dry brush is really just to, oh yeah, I just want to highlight those raised edges and bring them out to show all that light catching detail and raised edges and things. So yes, yellow is a devil, I know. That's why I've moved on to airbrushing, and no, I don't have an airbrush tutorial in the queue, and I'm probably not going to do one for a very long time. My garage is consumed with a bunch of things, like car parts and a car project and a car, and in order for me to do airbrush tutorials, I think I would really need to bring it inside, and I'm really not set up for that either. I use a industrial / kind of portable construction compressor, so it is not quiet. I'm not going to buy an airbrush compressor because I have a large one and a small one already, and it would just be unnecessary at this point. If one of them breaks, I will consider buying an airbrush compressor, but until then, sorry guys, no airbrush tutorials, at least not in the near term. Now, once the car gets finished and maybe I can make some room in the garage or figure out how to move the setup and have it lighted well enough, which is the other issue, then I will consider doing that. But I am also new to airbrushing, so watching me do something with an airbrush is probably not the best way to learn, because I mess up a lot. I try things that are probably not standard, and I do things that most people will be like, why is he doing that when he should be doing this? So it doesn't help me to teach you how to make the same mistakes I'm making when there's several YouTube videos and live stream channels that are what I use to learn to airbrush that I watch, and I'm like, well, yeah, these guys know what they're doing, so I'm going to watch them. I don't want to be the guy. I'm not ready to teach just yet, I guess, is a short way of me just saying that. I wouldn't mind showing someone if they wanted to see how I did it, how I made something, or got to a certain point with an airbrush or something like that. But again, that's not going to happen anytime soon, because I'm, like I said, if I'm not really ready to do any sort of like teaching or regular stream work, then I'm not going to go to all that unfortunate chaotic effort to make that work for now. So you just have to watch me work a brush like a normal person, or a freak, or whatever you want to call me. So I'm not looking for super like flat coverage either. I'm fully leaving a distorted or a varied gradient surface for good reason, because it'll add some visual variety. And when the wash goes over it, it'll smooth that out, and it will look more like you would think a military war machine type of vehicle would look. It's not going to look pristine. So the basis of my whole Crucis Lancers is that they're out on they're being used. They're combat. They're not out on parade, just hanging out and kicking back. They're out getting shot and all that. Now I didn't do any sort of like battle damage on those at the time, so again, I'm not really doing that with these. But the intent is to make these match the models that I painted over a decade ago, and few and far between in throughout, as closely as possible. But even if you go and look out on a flight line on a military base or at an army base, and you see a bunch of tanks lined up, yeah, they're all painted the same color, but they don't all match. So I kind of like the idea that there's a little bit of variation. At first, I wasn't cool with it because I was really, really particular and being very anal retentive about, I want them all to look the same. And then I realized, like, that's really not realistic. You're going to have mechs that have been around for a while. You're going to have new ones that just got brought in to replace battle losses and stuff. So, like to keep that in mind, that it's no big deal to have a few mechs here and there that look like they're a little more worse for wear, or ones that look like they just maybe got a coat of paint. You know, there's plenty of airplanes out on the flight line that I've seen that look like they need not only to be washed, but they need to be repainted. There's other ones like, oh man, it just got back from being refitted or back from inspections and it got repainted and it looks, I won't say brand new, but it looks a heck of a lot better than some of the other ones. So. I haven't decided what I'm going to do with the axe, so I'm going to highlight it. I don't know if I'm going to do all gunmetal. I'll probably do at least the tips in gunmetal, but again, since I'm undecided, I'm just going to go with what I'm doing here and get it all highlighted just to preclude me having to come back and do dry brush. Because dry brush is messy, and you know, if you don't have to come back and touch up dry brush, I know I'll be doing the hands and gunmetal, but I throw the highlights on there anyway just because it's usually just collateral paint damage. So now I'm just looking over the model, picking areas that maybe I want to smooth out just a little more, might need a little more paint, changing the angle of the brush. The back here is pretty bright up through here, which I think it would be normal. It's, you know, if the light's coming down, that would be a fairly bright side, so I'm okay with that. And as the wash goes on, it's going to naturally, gravity's going to take it down, so that should look pretty good. I'm going to hit just a couple more spots on these upper shoulder areas just to kind of give them a little more brightness. And again, we are over highlighting with this. So this is, if you decide to do this with a different color, or follow along with the videos as I make more with different colors. I need to do red, but I think white's next. Most people are wanting to see more white. You know, you're gonna want to go take it up, as to quote another video streamer that I watched, take it up to 11 and then knock it back down to 9 or 10. You know, or even further, depending if you're not happy with it, it's not the end of the world. The other thing about this particular process is that it is really easy to duplicate and it's really easy to touch up. So for instance, if this axe gets scratched or whatever, you know, I can sit here and I can start over with black or take it down to that Dark Angel green and dry brush and then do a wash just on this, and I can get it to match pretty darn close. And then if you use brush on sealer or whatever, then, you know, it's pretty well a done deal, you know. Or, you know, if an edge catches and it's got a little bit of exposed metal or whatever, you know, brush on primer, black, hey, that's easy, and then a little green, okay, that's cool, then a little bit of this touch up. You might not even have to put a wash on it if you put just a little bit of the highlight on there. Might hide it just well enough depending on how it looks. So, okay. So that is our bright olive axemen. So now again, this is where I would, I'd probably give this just a couple minutes to dry. But I'm just gonna show you what we're gonna go for now. So this is the Enforcer 3, and this got two washes, I should say. So the first one, it didn't get very dark, and we'll get to see what this one looks like with one wash. And this is again with my mix. I'm not gonna put dark tone or Nuln Oil on it, just because I know that I didn't use those on my other miniatures. Yeah, Roy, that is actually the basis to how I do mine. But what I do after that is I clean up those white panels, and it's almost kind of like a visual, like an eye trick. It is something I did on a different color. I did it on some blue that I need to finish those miniatures too. But what I did was went back and panel painted, but not the way you would think panel painting, in that I went and tried to go to every single edge. I basically just put the like 80 to 90% of the paint, and also thin, so I know it's going to be a little translucent, onto that like center panel to maybe take some of that darker wash area that kind of got, you know, kind of dingied up the white and brought it back a little bit. And what it really does is it brings more contrast to the wash that you put on the white, and since it brings out the white a little more, it looks a little less worn, but it still looks like a worn but kind of a whiter white, if you will. I don't know a good way to describe it, but that when I make the next video, you'll see, and you'll probably be like, oh yeah, I knew how to do that. And then once you see me put the little finishing touches on it there to get it to kind of pop a little more, you'll be like, oh, okay. It is a little time consuming, especially on mechs like Awesomes and things like that that have tons of little panels. But on something like, you know, the Penetrator, you know, you could go back and it actually wouldn't be that difficult. And you don't even need it to be smooth. That's the nice thing, is it doesn't need to be smooth. You're going to get a natural variation of the color, which is kind of how, if you had a 30-foot tall walking tank walking through the elements, it'd probably not look pure white. So again, kind of a little bit of realism, but it adds a little bit more pop and zing to it. But to each their own. All right, let's get our wash ready. So this is a magic wash. It is black ink. It is water, distilled water, and Future Floor polish. And for my first wash, I always add just a little bit of water because I'm never sure if some of this might have evaporated. So I've got some more distilled water. I'm just going to add a little bit of that. And what I'm kind of doing with that is two things. One, I'm kind of getting a feel for what the wash looks like. I'm kind of getting this consistency of how dark really is it. And the nice thing is I know I already got to do 2 washes. So if I do the first one too dark and then I do the second one too dark, well, you can't undo that. I'll have to start over again. But if I do this first one a little thinner, I can see how it lays down. And if it looks about like what I want, I might just not do the second one. But typically I'm going to do that second one. And then I can kind of adjust from there. So, I mean, this is a coverage wash. So just get it on there. You know, you're just looking to get every nook and cranny, every surface covered. This is super basic, super easy. You cannot mess this up, which is one of the reasons I like kind of this style, because anybody can do this. Nothing I have done requires any sort of special ability. It doesn't require any special brushes. I'm using cheap, you know, $3 pack or $4 pack of brushes right now. You know, if you spent $10 on paint, $3, $4 on brushes, and you know you bought your miniature, you're sitting right here, and you can get the exact same result that I'm going to get if you just want. I mean, I don't think there's a unit in the Battletech or a house faction in the Battletech universe that doesn't at least have a unit of green or green-based mechs. So, you know, if this helps you get a force painted up for whatever faction, then I'm glad that I was able to share it with y'all. If you don't like it, that's cool. I'm like I said, it is not my normal quality now as a painter, but it was. It used to be. This used to be. I mean, these miniatures are up on Camo Specs online. I think there's a Berserker and a couple others that are on there. You can see what it looked like way back in the day, and that was maybe not quite the limit of my ability, but that was my style, if you will, at the time, just because there were other techniques that I hadn't either learned well enough or wasn't implementing. So, you know, we all progress, we all learn, we all adapt. So now I'm just looking for major pooling, just anything that's really, really thick and bad. Honestly, this one doesn't look like it's doing much at all. You know, I'm checking these undersides of these arms here. I don't mind having a little shadow there. Place you got to look typically is the feet. You don't want super big pools down at the feet, and any big flat surface areas. This one since has a lot of breaks and everything, it's really not showing too much in the way of dark or pooled up areas, so that's good. Looks like I got nope, inside of his left arm there. So get that. There we go. Cool. So that's going to dry. Now you got to let this dry completely. So that's going to take 20 or 30 minutes, or put it in front of a fan or whatnot. So here, let's do a little comparison here. See what these look like. See if it shows up on camera. There's a little difference. So you can see, let's find some flat areas. Yeah, there we go. I know it's shiny, and I apologize for the glare. The Future Floor Wax obviously has a shine agent in it, and you can use matte medium or matte varnish into the mix if you want. I promise you this one's a little bit darker. So, but between the two, the edges on the Axeman are brighter. But the second wash, because the wash kind of enables it to absorb a little bit more. Actually, I need to catch this shoulder here. I just saw that. Touch this up. Right now, I noticed it. Add a little bit extra right there for now. The second time you wash, it'll darken it more, obviously, but the edges will lose some of that pop. So right now, again, this isn't bad. If you just did this is, again, there are plenty of people that paint like this, and that's fine. It's a good way to get a lot of miniatures painted. It's one of the ways lots of fantasy armies, especially like mass horde armies, are painted, and that's fine. There's a bunch of goblins that probably get paint jobs just like this. So once you get it dry and you get it darkened the way you want, you're going to end up with a miniature that looks like this Enforcer. Let me move this out of the way so I don't bump it here. So now we're going to come back to our dry brush, and we're going to do a traditional highlighting dry brush. So grab my olive green. Oh, hey, Faithless. My formula is kind of, well, it depends. I have a few different ones written down that I use. I typically start with 1 part of ink to 5 parts water to 10 parts of future, and then from there I will maybe dilute more, or depending on what I'm doing. It also depends on the color between black or brown or chestnut and things like that. So and then for the white, that was the other thing I was going to mention too. I make a soft wash, which you can buy that now. Secret Weapon Miniatures makes a soft wash, which I haven't tried it yet, but I'd like to. But I use like an armor gray. So I'm get a little off track here for a second. Let me pull this gray over here. I use this old Reaper armor gray, and I make a soft wash for that white specifically. I use white paint, and I wrote the recipe down for that, which is 2 parts Future Floor Wax, 3 parts water, and 1 part paint. And that's what I use to wash those white miniatures, which I'll show in that video eventually once I get that one made. But that is because I'm using paint versus ink. Ink can take more dilution, making up words now again, and still give you a good amount of coverage and shading and shadows. So. Conrad, yes, I post every video I make on YouTube. So I will always make sure, I can't guarantee when, but I always try to do it as soon as I can. So anything I make, especially on the stream, because sometimes they cut out, I will go back and edit them, put them on YouTube, and at least make them so they're watchable, because sometimes folks, either between my bandwidth acting up or their bandwidth acting up or whatever, I'd hate for someone to miss out on something simply because our connection sucked. So yes, I will always put videos up after the fact on YouTube, to host them there, so that they don't get kind of kicked off Twitch after a month or whatever it is, and people can go back and reference them. And I like to cross post there and show people, hey, you can check this video out, and this video, and this video. Hey, thanks for the mod. Yeah, this is I think the T model, the one with the Gauss rifle. I actually built this on one of the videos I did showing how to mod and pin and all that kind of stuff. So now I've got olive drab on my brush, and I am doing the dry out the brush dry brush right now. This is the true, like, I just want the highlights at this point. So I'm going a light touch. I'm going in a downward motion to catch the upper edges of these areas that I want to catch the green, the olive, I should say. Still a green, but this is how I am now bringing back some of those edges, which this is very basic. This is, I am not the first person to do this. This is all information that I have gleaned, and you can see from multiple sources on how to do it. I'm not saying this is the right way, the only way. It is a way, and that's fine. I do what works for me. Everybody should do what works for them, works best for them. This will do a couple things. It will bring out some of that gloss because you're putting paint over that gloss, but you're really going to need a sealant over this to make it look proper. Obviously, you're not going to want a glossy one, but again, you can tone some of that down with a matte medium, or if you add some matte sealer. Let me see if I can show a picture of that real quick. Surface primer, slow dry. There we go. If you add matte varnish to your washes that have future floor wax or anything that makes them glossy, like a drop or two, that will cut down a lot of the gloss. So if you're having issues with sealing your miniatures and getting them to kind of flatten out and get the the color, the overall finish that you want, then that will help you get ahead of the game before you even get to that clear coat. I have switched almost exclusively. I do like Tester's dull coat, but I have switched almost exclusively to a Krylon gloss, a couple coats of that over. This is when I'm finished to make the candy shell, and then I put the premium Vallejo matte, not what I just showed you, not the matte varnish I just showed you. This is not the premium. This is just the regular, like you can brush this on. I don't even usually use it for that either, but the premium. Holy cow! It is. I've held it up to what I've flattened out with my testers, and it's flatter. I like it, and I run it. You have to use an airbrush with it though. So that was one of the reasons why I really want to get my airbrush running, is because I was kind of getting a little bit of inconsistent results with the testers, and I mean I had 6 different cans of it, and it didn't matter which can I used. I was getting a little bit of areas like, well, I don't know why it is not flattening out, and the humidity here is only 50%, but it should not have been acting the way it was, and it was just kind of frustrating when I wanted something to be really matte, really just just a flat color, and I wasn't getting what I wanted. So the nice thing is I'll still use testers. It works great, and it can be used to dull things out. Like if this gloss, I could put testers over this if I wanted to, and then if I wanted to even flatten it more, great. If I'm happy with the way it looks when I'm done, and I might even just stick with that because my other miniatures are not flattened out with that airbrushed sealer. So for consistency's sake, again, I might do 2 coats of gloss and a couple coats of the Tester's dull coat, and that might be it. So I'm not against Testers in any way, shape, or form. I love their aerosol. If you use an aerosol primer or a sealer, that is the go-to. However, what's starting to work for me more is the airbrush method, and that's all I have to say about that. All right, so you're not going to be able to tell because of the gloss. Again, unfortunately, with my desk lamp, and I don't have a rheostat on it. They're fluorescents. I don't have a cool LED, and I'm not going to spring for one anytime soon. So this now, compared to this, and again, I wish I had 2 of the same miniature. I would have done it a little differently or at least shown you, but this is more matte. It's more subdued. This has more pop. The first wash is still working on taking down that drab green, the olive green. And now when we compare it to this guy here, and again, you're not going to get the same effect without seeing it in flat, sealer, obviously. And I sealed this a while back because I was putting it up for a while and I knew I was going to be sitting on it, but anyway, these will be very similar in color, and they'll fit together in the unit just fine. There's maybe a little bit of heavier olive on the kneecaps here, and maybe a couple other spots on the high raised edges, but that's no big deal. That's on the back of these too, so it's consistent in that regard. These I might consider maybe putting when I finish this, I might just put a touch of the black wash over those kneecaps, or I might put a little bit of the Dark Angel green over it, and then just barely dry brush it again, just to do it. So you can go back and hit the reset button, piecemeal if you want. But that is how easy this particular painting style. And I've done several themes, like I said, with this. The Wolf Dragoon's Gamma, I've done the yellow. You've seen me do that. The white, I said, of course it's different. The yellow, I've got the video on that. Red, sort of light, I do it this way, just because it's not super smooth. I'm not doing a bunch of panel blends and highlights, and it's not that I'm being lazy. It's just that I have a bunch of mechs to paint, and I'm not doing a showpiece or a particular one-off or a small unit or something. Then you gotta not necessarily cut corners, but you gotta find techniques that help you get the model on the table, and that's what I was going for with this. Get this high side a little more here. I just want to catch the top of that barrel. That would obviously have more light on it. So, and that's now you can pick and choose. You can sit there and go, oh, I want this corner to have a little more. Oh, I want this corner to have a little more. And you can just, you know, the crest of his head, you know, it's going to have a little more highlight, you know. So now I'll be down to putting on the gunmetal on the barrels and the hand and anywhere else that, you know, maybe some of the joints and things like that. And then eventually they'll get the red, white, and blue stripes or highlights that they're known for having, because this is the first Crucis Lancers. So that was about an hour we got from black, which is now green, first dry brush and first wash, 2 washes, and then the bring back the highlights. And now we're down to details and finishing.
Shutdown sequence initiated.